The sirens didn't ease into the night. They tore through it. Red and blue lights exploded against the rain, slicing the darkness like blades, flashing across wet pavement and brick walls and startled faces. She stopped walking the moment she heard them, not because she was afraid, but because she had learned a long time ago that sudden movement was never forgiven. She stood still on the sidewalk, rain soaking through her coat, water running down her sleeves, hands open and visible at her sides. Her chin stayed lifted, her back stayed straight. The street felt like it was holding its breath. The cruiser door opened with a sharp crack, and the sound cut through the rain like a warning shot. Boots hit the pavement, heavy, confident. The cop didn't rush. He didn't need to. This was his stage, his moment, and he took his time stepping into it. He looked at her once, up and down, slow and obvious, and then he laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even angry. It was careless. A short, amused laugh, like he'd just found something mildly entertaining on his way home. "Relax," he said, holding up a hand like he was calming a child. "You people always act nervous." The words landed harder than the rain. They always did. A few cars slowed as they passed. Someone on the corner stopped pretending to scroll on their phone and actually started recording. Another person crossed the street, not to help, but to get a better angle. Phones came up quietly, almost shyly, like everyone knew something ugly was about to happen but didn't want to admit they were watching it unfold. She said nothing at first. She had learned the power of silence, too. Silence kept you alive. Silence gave you space to think. Silence let the other person reveal themselves. The cop stepped closer, then began to circle her, slow and deliberate, like a predator bored with the chase. He asked her where she was coming from, then where she was going, then asked again, slightly differently, like he was testing which version would trip her up. He already knew her answers wouldn't matter. This wasn't about information, it was about control. It was about stretching the moment until it bent under his hand. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, calm, clear. "May I ask why I was stopped, officer?" That did it. His smile sharpened, edges suddenly visible. He stopped in front of her and leaned in just enough to make his presence unavoidable. "Because I can," he said softly, the words slipping out like a secret. Quiet, deadly. The rain tapped against the hood of the car, against his hat, against her shoulders. It filled the silence he left behind. The radio on his shoulder crackled, a burst of static followed by her name called in for verification. He repeated it out loud, but he twisted it, mispronounced it, dragged it through his mouth like it was foreign, like it didn't deserve to be said correctly. She corrected him immediately. Not loud, not sharp, just factual, like correcting a mistake on a form. That annoyed him more than shouting ever could. His jaw tightened. He leaned closer, too close now, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath, close enough that the line between authority and intimidation blurred. His voice dropped, private but meant to be heard. "You think this is funny?" he asked. She didn't answer. "I do," he added, a grin creeping back in. Rain dripped from the brim of his cap, falling in slow drops. Rain slid down her lashes, clung to the ends of her hair. She didn't flinch. She didn't wipe her face. She didn't look away. Her eyes stayed locked on his. That was the hook, not the sirens. Not the lights. Not the crowd. Her eyes. They weren't wide. They weren't pleading. They weren't scared. They were measuring. He broke eye contact first, turning back toward his cruiser like he'd won something. He pulled out his pad and began writing, even though he hadn't said what he was citing her for. The pen scratched against the paper with exaggerated slowness. He glanced over his shoulder at another officer across the street and chuckled, shaking his head. "Some people just need reminders," he said loudly enough for her to hear. "Need to be taught lessons, need to know their place." The other officer laughed, not because it was funny, but because laughter was easier than accountability. The crowd felt it then, that shift in the air, that invisible line being crossed. It wasn't about the law anymore. It wasn't even about her. It was about humiliation, about performance, about how easy it was to turn another human being into an object when you believed there would be no consequences. She felt it too, the familiar tightening in her chest, the memory of other moments, other streets, other men with badges or ties or titles who had spoken to her like she was something to manage instead of someone to respect. She breathed in slowly through her nose, held it, let it go. He turned back to her, pad still in his hand. "You got anything on you I should know about?" he asked. "No," she said. "You sure?" He raised an eyebrow. Because I can search that bag. The word search hung there, heavy with implication. She looked down at her bag for a second, then back up at him. Am I being detained? He laughed again, louder this time. You're being educated, he said. The rain picked up, drumming harder now, like the sky itself was impatient. She knew the moment had arrived, not because she was afraid of what he would do next, but because she was tired of letting moments like this pass unanswered. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her bag. The movement was calm, measured, no sudden shifts, no panic. Still, his hand moved instantly to his belt. Careful, he warned, his voice sharp now, edged with something ugly. She stopped for half a second, letting him see that she heard him. Then she continued, pulling out a simple leather folder. No flash, no drama, just brown leather, worn at the edges, like it had been opened and closed many times before. She held it up between them, letting it sit in the space he thought he owned. I think, she said softly, her voice steady despite the rain, you should read this. He stared at the folder. Just stared. Like it didn't belong in the story he was telling himself. Like it was a crack in the script. The crowd leaned in without moving, phone steady now, recording every second. The rain kept falling, washing over the street, over the badge, over the moment. For the first time since he'd stepped out of his car, the cop hesitated. His fingers tightened around his pen. His eyes flicked from the folder to her face and back again. Something shifted behind his expression. Not fear, not yet, but uncertainty. The kind that made Power uncomfortable. What's this supposed to be? He asked. She didn't answer right away. She let the silence stretch, let it press in on him the way his presence had pressed in on her minutes earlier. When she finally spoke, her words were quiet, but they landed with weight. Just something you shouldn't ignore, she said. The rain blurred the edges of the world, turning the street into streaks of light and shadow. The crowd waited, the camera lenses waited. And the man with the badge stood there, staring at a folder he hadn't expected, realizing, maybe for the first time that night, that he might not be the one in control of how this story ended. The pen stopped scratching, the laughter was gone, and in that brief pause, with sirens humming and rain falling and eyes watching from every direction, the balance of the moment trembled, just slightly, as if the ground beneath him had begun to shift. He didn't read the folder. Not yet. He looked at it like it was something dirty, something placed in his hand just to insult him. His lip curled as he took it from her fingers, holding it out away from his body between two fingers. Then he scoffed, loud and clear, making sure everyone around could hear. What is this supposed to be? He said, turning it over once. Another fake ID? His voice rose on purpose. This wasn't just for her. This was for the crowd, for the phones, for the people watching who needed to be reminded who held the power here. A few people shifted their weight. Someone let out a quiet breath. A woman across the street shook her head slowly, lips pressed tight, then looked away like she couldn't stand to watch anymore. No one spoke up. No one ever did. Silence was safer than justice when the badge was involved. He stepped closer again, invading her space like it was his right. The folder slapped lightly against his palm as he tapped it, once, twice. Where you coming from? He asked, louder now, slower, like he was talking to someone he assumed couldn't keep up. She answered, simple, clear, from work. He tilted his head. Oh yeah? A pause, a smile. And where do you work? She told him. He nodded like he didn't believe her, like the words were just noise. And who do you work for? She answered again. No extra detail, no defense. His eyes flicked down her coat, her shoes, the bag hanging from her shoulder. Then why are you dressed like that? He asked. The question wasn't curious. It was judgment wrapped in authority. It was meant to shrink her. Each question came heavier than the last, not because of what he was asking, but because of why. This wasn't about answers. It was about reminding her that he stood above her. That on this wet street, under these lights, he decided who mattered. She responded the same way every time. Even tone, one sentence, no begging, no attitude, just facts. And that made him angry. His jaw clenched, his shoulders squared. He didn't like that she wasn't unraveling, didn't like that she wasn't pleading. Power wanted reaction. Power fed on fear, and she wasn't giving him any. You mind if I take a look in that bag? He asked, already stepping toward it. You match a description. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. A description of what? She asked. He didn't answer. He never planned to. The words were enough on their own. Description meant permission. It meant he didn't have to explain. Before she could say anything else, headlights washed over them, bright and sudden. Another patrol car pulled up behind the first, tires hissing on the wet road. Doors opened. Another officer stepped out. Backup. Reinforcement. The imbalance in the air grew heavier, pressing down on her chest, on the crowd, on the moment itself. The first cop smiled wider now, emboldened. "This your first time?" he asked, glancing at his partner like they were sharing a private joke. The second officer smirked. Not cruel. Worse. Indifferent. She swallowed once. Slow. Controlled. Not fear. Never fear. Just a steadying breath to keep the memories from flooding too fast. They came anyway. Quick flashes she didn't invite. Being followed through stores as a teenager. Being asked if she could afford things she was already holding. Being pulled aside at airports. Being stopped on roads just like this one. Being talked over in meetings. Being doubted before she ever spoke. A lifetime of standing still and calm while other people decided who she was. She lifted her chin again. "Am I being detained?" she asked. The cop laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the rain. "No," he said. Then he leaned in, close enough that only she could hear the edge in his voice. "You're being taught." The words settled between them. Heavy, intentional. He finally opened the folder. Just a crack, just enough to glance inside. The crowd leaned in without realizing it. Phone steadier now, closer, ready. His eyes scanned whatever was on the first page, and for half a second, just half a second, his expression flickered. Confusion crossed his face, fast and unexpected, like a shadow passing over sunlight. Then annoyance replaced it. He snapped the folder shut. The sound was sharp, final. "Cute," he said, handing it back halfway before pulling it away again. "You think paperwork scares me?" A few people in the crowd exchanged looks. Someone muttered something under their breath. The rain kept falling, louder now, drumming against the hoods of the cars, streaking the light into long lines across the street. She watched him closely. Watched the way he held the folder now, tighter than before. Watched the way his smile didn't quite settle back into place. She took a breath. Deep. Slow. "Let it out." "This doesn't have to go this way," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried anyway. Calm words in a loud moment always did. He stepped closer again, so close she had to tilt her head up just slightly to meet his eyes. He lowered his voice, dropped it into something meant to intimidate. "For you," he said. "It already has." The second officer shifted his weight, looked from her to his partner and back again. The crowd didn't move. No one left. No one stepped in. The street felt suspended, caught between what had already happened and what was about to. The first cop straightened, squaring his shoulders, puffing himself up with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. He waved the folder once more, dismissive. "I don't care who you think you are," he said. "Out here I decide how this goes." She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was patience. Power enjoyed moments like this, enjoyed stretching them out, pressing down harder just to see how much someone could take. It mistook quiet for weakness, stillness for surrender, compliance for consent. He had no idea the ground beneath him was already cracking. Rainwater pooled around their feet, rippling with every passing car. The red and blue lights kept flashing, washing over faces, over hands, over the folder still clutched in his grip. Somewhere behind him, a radio crackled again, low and indistinct, like the beginning of a question that hadn't yet been asked. She held his gaze unblinking, waiting, and for the first time since he'd stepped out of his car, the power he thought he owned felt unsteady, like it was standing on something thinner than it looked, something already starting to give. The radio crackled again, sharp and sudden, slicing through the rain and the silence like a blade. Static first, then a pause. The kind of pause that makes people look up without knowing why. The kind that changes the temperature of a moment. The cop didn't notice it at first. He was still riding the last wave of his authority, still enjoying the way the street felt like it belonged to him. Then the voice came through, slower than before, careful. "Unit 14, can you confirm the individual's name again?" He sighed like he was being inconvenienced, rolled his eyes, lifted the radio to his mouth and repeated her name. Wrong. Again. The same careless twist, the same disrespect folded into the syllables. He didn't even look at her when he said it, like she wasn't worth the effort of getting it right. And then there was silence. Not the easy kind, not the kind filled with rain and sirens and background noise. This silence stretched. It lingered. It sat heavy in the air, pressing down on the street, on the crowd, on the man holding the badge. Even the rain felt like it softened, like it was listening too. The cop frowned slightly, shifted his weight. He glanced at the radio like it had betrayed him. Then dispatch spoke again. The voice was different now, lower, careful, measured in a way that didn't happen often. "Sir," the voice said, "are you aware who that is?" Something flickered across his face. Just for a second, a tightening around the eyes, a pause in his breathing. He stiffened, barely noticeable, but it was there. The crowd felt it before they understood it. Phones lifted a little higher. Someone leaned forward. Before he could answer, she spoke. Her voice cut through the moment, clean and steady, calm, clear, not raised, not shaking. "My full name," she said, "is Dr. Amina Carter." The effect was immediate. He froze. Not dramatically, not with some big gesture. Just stopped, like someone had pressed pause on him. His mouth stayed slightly open. His hand stayed half raised with the radio. The rain ran down his face, but he didn't wipe it away. Phones zoomed in. You could hear it, the faint whir of cameras adjusting. People realizing they were witnessing something that mattered. The radio crackled again, and dispatch continued, the words landing one by one, each heavier than the last. "Dr. Carter is the appointed federal oversight auditor for internal affairs. She's scheduled to observe ride-alongs and field conduct this quarter, starting tonight." The rain felt louder now, like it was clapping, like it was punctuating every word. The street felt smaller, like the buildings had leaned in, like the lights had narrowed their focus. Color drained from his face. It wasn't subtle. The confidence that had filled his posture just minutes ago leaked out of him, leaving something thin and unsteady behind. He looked down at the folder in his hand like it had changed weight, like it was suddenly heavier than it had been before. He opened it, fully this time. No snapping, no scoffing, just hands that moved slower than they had all night. Credentials, official seals, clear signatures, pages that didn't blur together no matter how hard he blinked. Real. The second officer took a step back without thinking. A small movement, but everyone saw it. Instinct had kicked in. Distance suddenly felt important. The crowd gasped, not loud, not all at once. Just a ripple of sound, disbelief spreading from one person to the next. A few mouths dropped open. Someone whispered her name like it was something sacred. All the jokes were gone now. All the tone, all the swagger that had filled his voice earlier collapsed in on itself. The laughter felt distant, embarrassing, like something that belonged to another man. "I didn't know," he said, the words tumbling out too fast, tripping over each other. "If I had known, I mean—" She raised a hand, not angry, worse, disappointed. The gesture stopped him cold. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it carried authority he didn't recognize anymore. The kind that didn't need a badge. "You didn't need to know," she said. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't rise, it didn't accuse. That's the point. The words settled into the space between them and stayed there. She looked around then, slowly, took in the cameras pointed at her, the faces watching, the people who had stood silent, the ones who had looked away, the ones who had known exactly what was happening and felt powerless to stop it. "At how easy it was," she continued, her voice steady, "for you to enjoy this." The cop swallowed, hard. His shoulders slumped like something heavy had finally been lifted off them. Except it wasn't relief. It was exposure. The kind you can't hide from. The kind that leaves you standing alone under lights that suddenly feel too bright. For the first time, that night, he didn't look bigger than the moment. He looked smaller. Not because she had humiliated him, but because the truth had. The rain ran down his face and mixed with something else now. Sweat. Maybe shame. He glanced at the crowd, then back at her, then down at the folder again like he was hoping the pages would rearrange themselves into something else. She didn't rush him. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She asked one final question. Her voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Is this how you police?" she asked. "Or just how you treat people you think are powerless?" The words hung in the air. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the second officer like he might rescue him. The officer didn't move, looked away instead. The crowd waited. The radio stayed silent. The rain kept falling. He had no answer. Not because one didn't exist, but because any answer he gave would expose him further. Because the truth had already been spoken out loud. Because the performance was over, and all that was left was the man behind the uniform. She held his gaze for a long moment, long enough for him to understand that this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about power changing hands. It was about a mirror being held up when he least expected it. Around them, the street felt different now, charged, awake, like something irreversible had just happened. And as the red and blue lights continued to flash, reflecting off wet pavement and watching eyes, one truth stood clear in the rain. Names shouldn't matter this much, but tonight, hers had changed everything. The investigation didn't creep in quietly. It arrived fast, firm, and impossible to ignore. By morning, the paperwork was already moving. By afternoon, statements were being taken. By nightfall, the word internal had lost its comfort and taken on weight. This wasn't a whisper behind closed doors. It was swift, public, unavoidable, the kind of process that doesn't ask for permission once the truth has been seen. The footage spread before anyone could spin it. No edits, no music, no captions telling people how to feel. Just raw minutes of rain and light and silence and power being misused in plain sight. People didn't watch it with rage. They watched it with clarity. They saw the pauses, the tone, the way laughter had been used like a weapon. They saw how normal it looked, how easy, and that frightened them more than anger ever could. The cop was suspended first, a short notice, a clipped statement. Then came reassignment. Then came something harder. He was required to sit in a room with no badge on his chest and no authority in his voice and listen, not to lectures, not to rules read off a page, to stories. Stories like hers, stories from people who looked like her, sounded like her, had lived entire lives being measured, doubted, stopped, searched, spoken over, laughed at, and told it wasn't that deep. Stories from people who had stood in the rain of moments like that one and walked away carrying something heavier than a citation. Dr. Carter didn't gloat. She didn't give interviews, dripping with victory. She didn't raise her voice or demand blood. She testified, calm, direct, honest. She spoke about dignity, about silence, about how power doesn't announce itself with cruelty at first. It slips in softly. It jokes. It tests boundaries. It watches to see what it can get away with. She talked about how character isn't revealed when cameras are rolling. It's revealed when someone thinks no one important is watching. When the person in front of you feels small enough to dismiss. She didn't make it about one man. She made it about a pattern. And the room listened. The cop sat there, hands folded, eyes forward, smaller now. Not because the uniform was gone. Not because of the headlines. But because he saw himself without the armor he had worn for years, saw the laugh replayed, the tone, the ease with which he had crossed a line and called it routine. He didn't recognize the man on the screen at first, then he did. And that recognition stayed with him. Weeks passed. The noise faded. Another story took over the news cycle. The street where it all happened dried up. The rain left no mark on the pavement. Sirens moved on to other nights, other moments. But inside him, something kept pressing. Something that didn't let the memory shrink or soften. That's why he requested the meeting. No cameras, no supervisors, no prepared statements, just a quiet room and 2 chairs facing each other. He arrived early. Sat with his hands clasped like he didn't know what to do with them anymore. When she walked in, he stood, not out of habit, out of something else. I thought it was a joke, he said, the words coming out rough. I didn't see it like that. She nodded once. Slow, measured. That's what made it dangerous, she said. There was no shouting, no dramatic apology, just honesty laid bare. He spoke about growing comfortable, about thinking the uniform made him untouchable, about how easy it had been to forget the person standing in front of him was a full human being with a life as complex as his own. She listened, really listened. Then she spoke again, about consequences, about how apologies matter but they don't erase impact, about how accountability isn't cruelty. It's correction. It's the difference between repeating harm and breaking a cycle. She accepted the apology. But she didn't offer absolution. Some things don't belong to one person to give back. Consequences remained, training, monitoring, a mark on a record that would never fully disappear, not as punishment, as reminder, because forgetting is how it happens again. Life moved forward the way it always does. The street returned to its routine. People walked where they had walked before. Cars passed without slowing. The city kept breathing. But something had shifted, not loudly, not all at once, just enough to matter. The lesson was never that she was important. Not because of her title, not because of her credentials. That wasn't the point. The point was that she shouldn't have needed them. She should have been treated with dignity before her name meant anything to him, because dignity isn't granted by titles. It isn't earned by status. It doesn't wait behind a name or a folder or a seal. It's owed, freely, immediately, To every person you meet, respect shouldn't depend on who you are behind the name, or what power you hold, or how small you think someone else might be. The real power isn't in a badge or a uniform or a position. It's in remembering that every person deserves humanity, especially when you think they have none.